Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jackie Hicks, and I'm an intelligence consultant at Nisos. We are a small managed threat intelligence company, and some of the things we investigate are influence operations, information operations, as well as disinformation. We'll be talking about a disinformation/election influence campaign in Honduras. I will walk you through the process, not just of how to identify these things, but we'll also cover why this is important. So, this is the agenda for today. As I mentioned, election influence campaigns in Honduras. And you might be wondering why we should care. We will be sure to cover that in this meeting. But also, equally important, what we'll cover is how specifically to identify these. The reason why we should care about these types of campaigns is because they're literally happening everywhere. First off, the issue of election influence is not just isolated to the US, as some of you might be more familiar with. This is happening literally in almost every country. Another thing is that typically we've seen that in the past, it might be state actors or state backed actors who are conducting these types of campaigns. And within the context of, Russian interference in the US elections in the past, that's true, but we're also seeing an evolution where this space is actually becoming highly commercialized. And what we mean by that is that increasingly we're seeing that marketing companies and black PR types of companies are actually being hired to conduct these types of campaigns online. So it's very significant. And sometimes these marketing companies and black PR campaigns are actually working at the behest of maybe politicians, political groups, and sometimes even at the behest of governments themselves. And what we'll be looking at today is specifically a negative campaign. So some of you may be familiar with this, but very simply, a negative campaign is when it's really aiming to spread negative information about somebody. The main objective is obviously to worsen someone's public image, to make that person unfavorable to vote for, essentially. And the reason why these are carried out is first off, to mobilize people. So if we're trying to attack one candidate with a negative campaign, it may mobilize people to actually go out and vote for the other candidate or the opposition. On the other hand, though, there is evidence that a lot of negative campaigns are actually used to demobilize people or really to suppress votes. And what this means is that rather than trying to get people to vote for a specific candidate, they really just want people to stay home and not vote at all. And then, how negative campaigns are actually carried out. Very simply, these campaigns will attack an opponent, and all of these components may or may not be present in a negative campaign. It's not necessary that a negative campaign meets all of these factors, but these are some of the things that you may see in a negative campaign. So, first off, that it may be attacking an opponent. The campaign may be seeking to exploit people's fears about an opponent in order to manipulate them not to vote or to vote for somebody else. Sometimes these negative campaigns include deliberate leaks of information. And then in some cases, also, we see that these campaigns will compare and contrast a candidate versus their opponent. So we'll come back to this because this will be really important for later on. All right, so how do we actually identify these types of social media influence campaigns? Here at Nisos, we actually have a well established counter disinformation framework for how we identify these campaigns online. And most importantly, they focus on specific narratives that actors are using. They also focus on accounts or outlets that are being used to share or spread a story. And they also focus on the signatures that are being used as part of a campaign. So, this is actually a process that we use. So, starting from the left, if we wanted to actually identify an influence campaign online, what we would do is we would conduct a literature review into some of the geopolitical issues that might be surrounding a country. What we will use that for is to identify niche narratives and to map these narratives and track them over time. So, specifically, once we've identified a narrative, we'll also identify hashtags that correspond to that specific narrative. And then next, we will use social media analysis tools to identify what actors and outlets are basically sharing these specific narratives. So, the important thing with an actor attribution is to identify who is starting the story that we're trying to track. And then we also want to identify who is spreading the story. And once we're able to identify what social media accounts are being used as part of this story or what websites are being used. What we'll do next is we'll actually enumerate all of the technical details associated with accounts and with these websites. This is really to better enable us to attribute who's behind a specific campaign. So turning to the Honduran elections, this past November, Honduras held an election, and these are the main players in that election. So starting from the left, we have Salvador Nasrallah, who honestly, he's not that significant because he did drop out of the race quite early, but he is one of four candidates who originally decided to run. And then next, second from the right, we have Tito Asfora of the incumbent party. He was obviously favored by the incumbent party to come in and win, but he wasn't really a popular candidate. He was the mayor of Tegucigalpa. He was facing a lot of competition, and that's really presented by the next two candidates. So Yani Rosenthal was important in this election, really because he was a wild card. He was actually incarcerated in the US, serving charges for money laundering for a narco trafficking group. So you can start to see that this election was a little bit dramatic in certain ways, and that it was important because we could see tensions between the incumbent party, new incoming wildcards who may have ties to drug trafficking. And then finally, on the right, we have Xiomara Castro, who is a former First Lady of Honduras. She's actually the wife of Manuel Zelaya, who is a former leftist president of Honduras, and he was actually ousted in a military coup. So this was really significant in this election to see that she could make a potential comeback and that the left could make a potential comeback within this election as well. Because of her husband and their ties to Venezuela, she was really seen as a potential puppet of her husband. So that's the argument that a lot of individuals were making against her. Ultimately, what we identified was an online social media influence campaign that was seeking to attack Xiomara Castro and Yani Rosenthal, but it was also very importantly trying to suppress votes. So it wasn't really trying to get people to go vote for Nasrallah or any of the other candidates like Asfora. It was really trying to deter people from voting at all. What we found were over 300 coordinated and authentic accounts, aka fake accounts, and these were all on Twitter. Most interestingly about these accounts is that they were all created in 2011, and they also displayed systematic activity. And what I mean by this is that it appeared that there was some sort of automation in terms of how these accounts were behaving. So we ended up reporting this entire network to Twitter, and within about a day or two, the whole network was taken down. These are some of the hashtags that the campaign was using. And you'll notice that these are pretty generic. Two of the hashtags are some of the candidates' names. And another one is Honduran elections, and then the next, the one at the top is the Liberal Party of Honduras. And so what's significant about these hashtags is typically we try to find really niche hashtags and niche narratives, but these are actually very general. So what we concluded about this network is that it was also trying to influence the general public discourse and political discourse in Honduras. When we took a look at some of the narratives that were used to attack Yani Rosenthal and Xiomara Castro, on the left, these are the ones used to attack Yani Rosenthal. So these were really exploiting the fact that he served time in prison. So you see that, he's being called a money launderer, a criminal, cachareco, which means crooked, and he's also being called a narco in this network. And then on the right, these were some of the attacks that were used against Xiomara. A lot of the times I would see that these fake accounts were calling her a puppet of her husband, but they also were really against some of the leftist views that she had. So she was accused of being a Chavista as well as too pro LGBT. How did we actually find this network? When I was looking into information about the Honduran elections, what I did was I turned to Twitter and I just started looking at the hashtag Honduran elections or Elecciones Honduras. And what I wanted to see was, what are people saying about the elections? What's the general political discourse? And basically, what are people saying about the elections? So, starting on the far left, I started to see posts like this where they're memes that are usually depicting Yani Rosenthal or Xiomara Castro. And as I started scrolling, I started to see more and more of these posts where it's a user basically saying something like along the lines of Xiomara is the best candidate, but if she makes an alliance with Yani, I'll forget about politics. So that's what the one on the far left says. As I continued scrolling, I saw in the middle that there was this post, Xiomara is my candidate, but if she signs an agreement with Yani, it's not worth going to vote. Yani is a criminal. And scrolling further, I saw the next post, which was a meme featuring Xiomara Castro, and it said, I believe in Xiomara, but if she joins ex-con Rosenthal, it's like voting for the incumbent party. And all that Yani wants is power. So all of these posts used the hashtag Honduran Elections. And, they all had some sort of meme. You may have noticed that they have a similarity in syntax and sentence structure within all of these posts. And then, in addition to having the same hashtag, these posts were all made on the same day. So this is starting to look a little bit weird. And I continue scrolling. And I also started looking at what these accounts were posting in their other posts. So I took a look at some accounts to see what other hashtags they were using. And if we start on the far left, this one account started using the hashtag Yani Rosenthal. And then in the middle, Yani Rosenthal again is the hashtag. And then the next account, they were using hashtag Xiomara Castro. And what you'll notice about these posts is that, again, we're seeing the same use of these, manufactured memes that look kind of similar. And in general, they're all attacking Yani or Xiomara. Additionally, what you may see in the bottom here is that they were all posted on the same day, October 7th. And then as I continued scrolling even further and looking at some of these new hashtags, I noticed that I was starting to see the same memes over and over and over again. And again, we'll notice that if you can see the translations, these all have the same sentence structure. So they're all generally saying something positive about Xiomara. However, if she joins Yani, on the far left it says, I won't even go to vote because Yani is a criminal. In the middle, they say, I'll vote for Nasrallah instead of voting for these two. And then on the far right, they're saying that Xiomara should win on their own merit without having to have an alliance with Yani. So after looking at all these posts, I used several social media analysis tools to pull down all of the posts that used these variations of hashtags within the first week of October because I wanted to see who was actually posting. Are all these posts the same? And the main thing to try to figure out here is, are these real people making these posts? Looking at the syntax of all the posts and looking at the reuse of memes, what that really presented to me is that, something fishy was going on here. But when we conducted the social media analysis and pulled all of the data down, it became much more clear that there was definitely evidence of coordination and systematic activity. So what you see here in this image are 19 posts by 19 individual accounts, and they were all made at the exact same time, literally down to the millisecond on the same date. So this really indicates that there's some sort of automation or systematic posting that's being conducted by somebody who has control over these accounts. So looking at this account, does anyone want to guess if this is real or fake? Zishan, can you tell me if this is real or fake?
It looks fake. The picture looks like it's a GAN generated picture, but
Oh
that's
my
just a guess.
God. Great answer. So you are 100% correct. This picture of this man, he's actually not a real person. This is a GAN picture. We have some systems that we can run images through the system and it'll tell us the percentage chance that this picture was auto-generated. And this actually got a 75%. And if you're not familiar with what GAN is, these are generative adversarial networks. I think that's what that stands for. But what that means is this is an image that was basically created by AI. So this is, not a real person. You can actually go out to some websites to get these pictures generated for you for free if you want to use some of those. We'll actually see in this slide, here are additional examples of GAN images. So you can see here that you don't necessarily have to have a tool to identify if these are GAN images. There are some clues that are visible to the naked eye. Unfortunately, we can't zoom into some of these pictures. Usually when these pictures have a person with glasses, there's going to be some sort of misalignment with the glasses. Another thing is that you'll see a misalignment with the ears. So you'll see that they're severely asymmetrical. And some people legitimately have asymmetric ears, but in these, you'll see that there's like a really, like the ears won't match each other even. And then like this guy here, we unfortunately we can't zoom in, but you'll see that his face is, there's some sort of asymmetry going on with his face as well. A couple other clues to us, aside from the fact that these are GAN images, that'll help you identify whether an account's fake or not. So all of these accounts you can see joined sometime in 2011. Additionally, all of these accounts are following the same amount of accounts. So these are all following 200, which is kind of strange. Also, you'll see that the backgrounds look like they might be some sort of stock images. So you could easily reverse image search those to verify if these are actually stock photos. But the main thing about the date, though, that we should take away from this is that this raises a significant possibility that these accounts were likely purchased at some point, probably from, some sort of online account store. There's also the possibility that these accounts were compromised at some point and resold to whoever's running this campaign. But it's very unusual that these accounts are so old. To me, it doesn't seem likely that these were farmed. So as I mentioned before that we had told Twitter about this network, we were showing them some of these accounts and we actually were able to identify a new TTP. Twitter told us that they had seen the use of GAN images before, but they hadn't seen this. So if you can see this image in the middle, that's a Twitter account belonging to Miguel Garcia. You'll see that there's a Facebook account linked here. It's also following 200 accounts like the other accounts that we saw on the prior slide. This one joined in March 2012. But what we want to highlight here is the fact that it's linking to a Facebook account. When I took a look at what this link was, it was actually a Facebook account for a different person named Victor Beleza, who lives in Peru. Upon looking at this account further, I found the profile photo that's being used in the Twitter account. And what's interesting here is some of these accounts were trying to look like real people by stealing images from real users, from real Facebook users. And they were also providing links in the profile to provide some sort of image of legitimacy that this is a real person. But that's actually what kind of proves that this account is fake. This was really cool to find out that this was something new that Twitter hadn't seen before. And as we continue to track this network, we found that in the following week, all of these accounts started to make additional posts about, hey, there might be an alliance between Yani and Xiomara. This can't happen. And they started to provide links to this famous newspaper in Honduras called La Tribuna. And if we take a look at some of these articles, as you can see here, they're talking about the potential for Yani and Xiomara to have an alliance. And then in one of the articles, they actually say on Twitter, many voters are beginning to denounce a possible pact. So this seemed a little strange to me that this network is linking to a news article that's citing them, basically citing these Twitter accounts and their behavior. And upon further investigation, we actually realized that this news outlet was actually a fake copy of the real site. So as you can see, like up here, this is the domain for the fake site. And this actually tripped me up the first time I saw it. I thought that this was actually a real, like the real domain. But then we saw that upon further investigation that this is actually the real domain here on the right, latribuna.hn. And then if you compare what the fake site looks like versus the real site, you can see that the same, logo is being used, but there are some differences. I couldn't really notice it at first, but if you look at this, you can definitely see some differences. And what really helped us to figure out that this was a fake site is that Honduran users on Facebook were starting to share pictures of that fake site and were saying that they were fake. And additionally, the real La Tribuna posted several articles saying that they would prepare legal action against cyber criminals who created a fake copy of their website. So, unfortunately, with those websites, we saw that it was privately registered. In terms of attribution, we unfortunately couldn't figure out anything a little bit further that would help our investigation. But as I mentioned, we did report this to Twitter and they did take down the network. In terms of the election itself, Xiomara actually ended up winning, and she became Honduras's first female president. And then most recently, we saw that the incumbent president, Juan Orlando Hernandez, actually got arrested and is facing extradition to the US on money laundering charges. Something to note is that when we reported this network to Twitter and they took the network down, something that happened is we had actually identified additional accounts, but we weren't 100% sure they were part of this network. We knew that there was some connection, but they didn't exhibit the exact same behavior. But Twitter took these accounts down as well. And that indicated to us that there was some sort of internal telemetry that connected the entire network. And okay, so this is going back to what we learned about negative campaigns, right? So, one potential trend that you could see in negative campaigns is that there's a compare and contrast. In this campaign, we didn't see that at all. Usually, we were just seeing Castro and Yani being attacked. And Tito Asfora of the incumbent party was actually never mentioned by this entire network at all. And by the time this network was active ahead of the elections, Salvador Nasrallah had already dropped out. So Tito was the third candidate. And again, we don't have 100% attribution of this network, but Tito Asfora and the National Party of Honduras were the only ones who essentially stood to gain from a negative campaign attacking Castro and Rosenthal. So some conclusions here. What we can see from this network is that, sometimes it's easier to convince someone not to vote than it is to convince them to vote. So this behavior that we saw in the network, it was primarily aimed at just making sure that people didn't vote for Castro or Rosenthal. And another thing is that overall, looking at this influence network, it may seem that it was rather simple or maybe relatively easy to put together. And that's because it is. For bad actors who are trying to conduct these types of operations online, it's really low threat for them, mainly because they have minimal repercussions to doing so. The worst thing that can really happen to them ultimately is that their network will be taken down. So that's just something to take away from looking at these networks. But, anyways, I hope that you enjoyed this presentation and we can get to some questions.